Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Now, as we were discussing about the evaporation, there are many other factors on which the rate of evaporation depends.
Okay, so what are the factors that is responsible for evaporation? So the factors responsible for evaporation are, the number one is the temperature. It's temperature. Fine. Number two is humidity. Next, number three is the wind speed. And the fourth one is the surface area. So these are four important factors which are responsible for evaporation. Now let me explain one by one. Now what is temperature? How does temperature influence the rate of evaporation? Now when we take temperature, we find that higher the temperature, more would be the evaporation. Now why is it? What is the reason? How is temperature related to the rate of evaporation? Because when the temperature increases, the molecules of the substance, that is water, gets enough kinetic energy, and due to attaining of kinetic energy, what happens? It leaves the liquid phase and gets transformed into the vapor state. So more the temperature, more would be the energy intake, and it will have more kinetic energy to free itself from the bond that exists between the liquid particles, and that get converted into the vapor state. So that's we see that the evaporation rate increases when we increase the temperature. Similarly, if we decrease the temperature, the rate of evaporation would also decrease because the energy input is less. Fine. The next one is humidity. Now what is humidity? Humidity basically means the level of water vapor in the atmosphere. How much water vapor is present in and around a place is called as humidity. So how does humidity influence? More humidity, less would be the rate of evaporation. Now how is it? Because what is evaporation basically? The transformation of water from the liquid state to the vapor state. That is, the liquid water gets converted into the water vapor. Now humidity means the level of water vapor in the atmosphere is quite high. So more humidity means more amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. So what would happen? The evaporation rate will decrease because there will be no availability, or there will be less availability of space in the atmosphere for the water vapor to go and add to the atmosphere, and thus the rate of evaporation decreases. But if the humidity level is low, for instance when it is peak summers or during the winters, when you would see that when the humidity level is low, that is the amount of water vapor present in the atmosphere is low, then there is more availability of water, there is more availability of space in the atmosphere, and thus what would happen? The water molecules would readily get converted into the vapor phase, and thus the rate of evaporation would also increase. So you need to understand that high level of humidity would reduce the rate of evaporation, whereas less humidity will increase the rate of evaporation. Next, what is the third factor? Wind speed. Now how does wind speed influence? More wind speed, higher the evaporation rate. Now why is it more the wind speed? Why is the rate of evaporation increases? The reason is wind speed means that the particles of the water molecules which are present on the surface of any place, when the wind is blowing at a very faster rate, then what does it do? It induces some energy into the water particles and thereby helps it to get converted from the liquid state into the vapor state. So higher the wind speed, it is going to give more energy. It will enforce the water molecules to get converted from the liquid state into the vapor state, and thus we see that the rate of evaporation increases. Whereas the last one is the surface area. Surface area, or rather I can say more the surface area, more is the evaporation rate. Why is it? Because when the surface area increases, then we find that the number of water molecules which are exposed to the atmosphere is more, and thus the energy intake, more number of water molecules would be just exposed to get energy, to absorb energy, and thus get converted from the liquid phase into the vapor state. So you would see that if you, after you had washed the clothes, what do? We spread it. The reason why we spread it is that we are trying to expose the water molecules to the maximum surface area. So more the surface area, more number of water molecules will be exposed to the atmosphere. It is going to gain more energy and thus get converted into the vapor state faster. So more the surface area, more would be the rate of evaporation. So to sum up, the different factors responsible for evaporation are temperature, humidity, wind speed and surface area. How does temperature influence? Higher the temperature, more would be the rate of evaporation. Similarly, lower the temperature, less would be the rate of evaporation. Next, humidity. Higher the level of humidity, less would be the rate of evaporation. Whereas, less the humidity, more would be the rate of evaporation. Third, wind speed. Higher the wind speed, more would be the rate of evaporation. Lower the wind speed, less would be the rate of evaporation. And the last, surface area. More the surface area, the rate of evaporation would also increase. But if the surface area is less or it is reduced, then the rate of evaporation will also be very slow or will also reduce. So I hope this different factors responsible for evaporation is clear. And it is very, it becomes more clear to you when you try to recollect some of the examples, some of the phenomena that you see in and around us. For example, if you are washing your clothes, after you had washed the clothes, if you spread it properly, then you would see that the level of drying up is faster. The rate of drying of that cloth is faster. In summers, we find that the cloth dries faster because the temperature is high. Whereas during rainy seasons, you find the clothes takes a lot of time in order to dry. Why? Because the humidity level in and around is high. So it takes more time for the water molecules to get converted from the liquid state to the vapor state. Similarly, when it is quite windy, if you spread the cloth, you will find that the cloth dries faster. Why? Because the wind is inducing energy into the water molecules which are present, and thus it helps it to get converted into the vapor state. And as I had already explained you how surface area influences and why do we spread out the cloth to the maximum, so that maximum amount of water molecules can get exposed to the atmosphere and get converted into the vapor state. So these small examples that we see in and around us helps us to identify the factors that are responsible for evaporation. You can also take the example of, suppose your mother had mopped the floor. During the winters, what would she do to facilitate faster drying? She would switch on the fan. So what is she trying to do? She is trying to take the help of wind speed. More the wind speed, more would be the rate of evaporation. Clear? So these are some examples that you can identify from in and around you and can actually see that how the different factors of evaporation influences the rate of evaporation.